All right, just testing the microphone here. Looks like we're good. Hello, and welcome to this Rewire Guide to Football. I'm going to be spending the next little while trying to talk through the work I do with footballers specifically. So, if you're kind of new to this channel, if you don't know me, I'm a movement coach specializing in the brain and nervous system. I usually like to tell people my job is to find all of the little things in your training, in your movement, that tend to slip through the cracks of a conventional program. So, by understanding how the brain works, I get to assess the way that you move and see, what is the smallest change that we can make, or the smallest changes that we can make to make the biggest difference over a long period of time. And so that's the main kind of chunk of work that I do. And I've done that pretty regularly with footballers, kind of differing abilities, some pretty high level, nobody kind of at the world class level when it comes to one on one stuff. But then this was also off the back of a request from the Reddit group Boot Room. I responded to a post on there. It's taken me ages. I did try to do this once before and realized that actually I needed to think it through, plan it out some more. So apologies for anyone who's been waiting for this for a while. But in that context, we were talking about group coaching and coaching for kids classes, and how do we use more brain-based ideas for coaching. So at the second half, I'm going to talk about my experience with that. That is going to be around, it'll be a bit of a weird tangent. I'll talk about my work for the National Centre for Circus Arts, a circus school in London, which involved a collaboration with Chelsea Football Club, a guy called Will Tullett. It's all super, super interesting. After the stream, I will put in the comments or in the description somewhere, like the timestamp. So when I'm getting onto that, because I know some people are kind of mainly here for that. I just want to do the other stuff first because it might help to make more sense. And then it means I can be a little bit more vague in the second half. And we can discuss things further on Reddit or on the comments. If we need to do another video about specifics and ideas, then I'm more than happy to do that. So yeah, with that out of the way, let me talk first of all about the work that I tend to do when I'm working with footballers one-to-one. So when we look at like the standard sort of football training that gets done, what are the neurology-based aspects that either people often overlook? So, if you're part of a big club, it's pretty normal now to have, psychologists, neurologists assessing quite a lot of different things. Vision training, especially, is pretty widespread. Like as you go higher and higher up, more and more clubs are starting to incorporate vision training. And at the top level, it's pretty well integrated by now. Like it's an obvious thing. But if you're kind of lower down, or if you're having to manage more of this stuff yourself, then maybe this is going to be interesting. One of the other reasons it takes me so long to do these is I never know when I start talking about this stuff, am I just preaching a bunch of stuff that everybody already knows? And I never have a good answer for that. I've encountered loads of people who I would have thought should be well versed in this stuff that turns out not to be, and equally the other way around, people who don't actually who are like managing all their training all by themselves. So you go, okay, you probably don't have enough time to manage all this stuff, and actually they seem pretty clued into the type of work that I do. So in this section, we're going to be talking through pretty much 4 different types of training in relation to the brain. We've got the visual system. So vision training, I've already said, super important. We're going to have the vestibular system. So that's all around balance. We'll explain what that is in a minute. Proprioception, that's one that is, if the word's not pretty familiar to you, the type of training that you're going to do is going to be pretty familiar already. What people might be missing is the specific way that training could be done more efficiently. And then finally, we've got cognitive training. So when it comes to football, soccer, the game itself, it's actually one that lends itself better to like higher level cognitive tasks and things like that. As a sport, it actually requires quite a lot of thinking, and whether that feels like you're doing that thinking on the pitch, or whether it feels like you've just put in enough work over time so that you're able to think quicker and act more on intuition when you get out into a game. Either way, there is a lot more going on in the kind of higher order centers of the brain, like the more centers that we would think about, like logic and cognitive thought and stuff like that. So we'll do a bit on that as well. And I imagine actually when people are asking me about brain training, sometimes that's what they're expecting I'm going to talk about anyway. But we're going to start first with vision. So the visual system, crucially important in a game like football. As I said, there's a really strong athletic component for football, but one of the things that most people kind of agree on is that in other sports, what you want to do is you want to max out a specific stat of athleticism, so for something like running, you want amazing kind of fast twitch muscle fibers, and really it is just that sprinting motion that you want as good as possible. In football, actually, you need to be able to do a ton of things. You need to be able to go fast when you need to go fast. You need to be able to decelerate and stop at short notice. You need to be able to read the entire pitch and kind of analyze what's going on multiple times a minute. So, the game's constantly changing and you need to be able to be aware of all of that. And that then also means that you need quite a higher level of kind of general mobility than a lot of sports might require, because when it comes to like muscle chains and tissue chains and stuff like that, you're almost always kind of like, you're not, what's the best way to say this? You're not adopting like one set position. You might be in the same body position, but your head's now in a different place. Your arms are in a different place. You kind of need to be able to be totally malleable with how your body's moving, being able to look one way, run the other way, have your eyes tracking something one direction while your head's moving another direction. All of that is super important. And vision is really the aspect of that ties all of it together. When I'm doing work as a kind of neuro coach, vision is probably the most important sense for, I would say, every sport, because there's kind of a saying that, speed comes from the visual system. So you can talk fast twitch muscle fibers and explosive power and strength and stuff like that. But in reality, especially in a more complex sport like football, what makes you fast is getting the information before the other player. And that is where your visual system can really make you shine over anybody else. So the person who knows where to look to get the next piece of information, the person who can get that information in really quickly, is then afforded more time to process it and understand it and come up with the clever solution in order to figure out the next play of attack. So when it comes to vision training for football, one of the things that I feel like is overlooked, we do a lot of work, towards like reaction training. So, you see people with all the different lights. When it buzzes, you've got to reach out and press it. And you also have like lots of different kind of visual processing exercises I've seen people use, where, you know, bit of information flashes up and you have to respond in a certain way based on the information that you're given. But actually, something I feel is pretty overlooked is, can your eyes actually move fast enough and precisely enough to get to the right place and stop there without disrupting everything else that's going on in your body? So your eyes, there's kind of a finite number of ways that they can move. So, you know, they can either be tracking something in a smooth motion. So, you know, the eyes are actually just moving in a linear fashion, but maybe in lots of complex different ways. They can be making jumps from one place to another, which has its own complications. So like tracking is generally a bit easier for the muscles because it's a bit of a smoother ride, whereas a jump requires sufficient acceleration and deceleration for the eyes to kind of take off and stop in the right place. And there's a real tendency as stress levels go up for this to either over or undershoot. And so for some people, their eyes are going to jump too far and then they're going to have to correct themselves, or they're going to jump only halfway and then they need an extra bit of effort. And that might not seem like it should be inconsequential, right? Like it only takes a fraction of a second anyway. But when you start adding up all of those fractions of a second across 90 minutes, actually what you're going to find is somebody whose eyes aren't working as well aren't going to keep up with somebody whose eyes can move quicker and actually are more relaxed about that whole process. Other kind of motions for the eyes, things moving towards and things moving away. And then you've got keeping the eyes actually still. So you're focused on a still target. And finally, we've got peripheral vision. So the first thing that I always would like to test, if someone tells me they want to be a better footballer, number one is, are you actually efficient at using all of those different types of movements with your eyes? Now, when it comes to kind of professional semi-pros, very often I will find if I just test these regularly, so, you know, I tell them, okay, we're going to, you know, follow the target and move around. We see that the eyes are capable of those movements pretty well. But in football, where the interesting stuff comes up is that sometimes the footballers seem to have a bit of difficulty separating the eye movement from other reflexes in their body. Okay, so the way to think about this is, if my eyes are going this way, usually that's a signal to my body that the rest of me is probably going to want to go over there at some point. It's a little bit different. So like when my eyes jump, the impetus to rotate the whole body in that direction is going to be stronger. When my eyes are kind of smoothly tracking things, there's a sort of impetus to brace, so to keep the body a bit more still. And one of the problems with football is that you usually see it can be really hard for players to disconnect the eye movement from the kind of natural reflexes that they want to take. So I hope that makes sense. But like eyes jumping to the right, if I ask somebody, okay, I want you to jump your eyes left and right, left and right, left and right. Well, as they're doing that, and this will be a big exaggeration, but their head is going to be doing tiny little movements alongside it, or their trunk is going to want to join in. Sometimes you'll see like things going on in the shoulders. Sometimes it won't even be in the body, but it'll just be, you know, maybe your jaw starts to twitch a little, or your face is getting involved. And again, this is another thing where this seems like it might be fairly inconsequential, but what you have to think about is, like I said, football is one of those kind of sports where your eyes might need to go this way while the rest of you is going the other direction. And so your body is naturally trying to adopt certain patterns to make things easier. But if you want to be an efficient footballer, actually you don't want to be relying on the efficient patterns. You want to be able to create whatever pattern between the eyes, between the neck, between the trunk, between the arms and shoulders, and then between the legs. And every time there's a disconnect between what your neck or trunk wants to do and what your legs are trying to do, the risk to joints like the hips, the knees, the ankles goes way, way up, because those joints actually rely on kind of force dispersal through the trunk and torso in order to be able to generate like huge amounts of power. So the number one thing that I would say is important when we're talking about brain training for footballers is, can your eyes actually move in all the different ways that we want them to be able to do without any kind of disruption? And that's the one that I see most often with footballers. If I was to guess as to why, I see it more in footballers than a lot of other sports. I think the fact that in football you get kind of taken down to the ground a whole lot. In fact, I see this way more in people who play rugby. So I think this is pretty on the money. The more time that you spend falling in a non-controlled way in your sport, the more your brain starts to get stressed about the idea that you might fall again. And so what it likes to do is, when really important systems like the eyes are moving, it likes to add in little protection mechanisms to say, okay, well, when the eyes go this way, I don't want to be in this compromised, vulnerable position where my head's going one way and my body's going the other way. So I'm going to try and force the body to go the same direction as the head, because that will keep me safer all around. And that kind of, when it comes to vision, is the most important thing that we can do in terms of putting a lot less stress through the system so that people can work more efficiently. But also, if we can make these movements work quicker, so like this same eye jumping exercise, if I can perform more jumps in a minute with my head totally still, then when my eyes need to move, they can move quicker than the next guy. And if my eyes can get to the next spot sooner than somebody else, they will get the information sooner than somebody else, and then they'll be able to react to that information sooner than somebody else. And pretty much all the visual training we do just kind of layers up on top of that. We'll add in other cognitive exercises on top of vision. So, the left and right exercise, maybe there's a light on the left, maybe there's a light on the right. If the light changes color, then that changes the exercise to maybe up and down, or it might change it to other things. We'll kind of touch that when we get to the cognitive side of things. But this is just meant to be like a bit of a brief touch. So I'll leave that for most of the visual stuff. The only other thing that I'll add in is peripheral vision. It can be especially useful when it comes to training sport. So when your stress levels rise, the brain realizes that it doesn't need to focus on loads of different things at the same time. If your stress is rising, it's because there is an immediate threat. And what your brain will do to respond to that is hone in all your focus on that one specific thing. And as a result, as our stress levels go up, what we tend to see is peripheral vision tends to close off. I'm sure you can imagine why that would be a potential big problem in football, a sport where you need to be able to scan everything all the time. The wider your field of view, the easier that's going to be. Okay. And if your field of view becomes much, much smaller, then suddenly you're going to find your head needs to be moving wildly quicker than it was before. People always send me those videos of somebody like Messi, and it's like, why is he better? It's because he's always looking to different spots. And I find it funny because I'm thinking about, well, what would happen if when his stress goes up, if his peripheral vision gets smaller still? That's going to change from head movements to almost full torso movements, and they're going to be constant and nonstop, and it might not actually be such a positive thing. So improving peripheral vision can be a really great thing when it comes to improving your athletic capacity in football. One, again, because it's going to result in less unwanted head movements. We only want movements that are necessary for the action that we're taking. But number two, when your peripheral vision is opened up, stress levels by default have to go down. So this can work one of two ways. If you work on a footballer on stress control and reducing stress, you should see that actually their peripheral field should open up. Or you can do it the other way around. If you can work on opening up the peripheral field, a lot of the time stress will come down. And so depending on the type of athlete that you're working with, for some of them, you're going to find that actually you want them to see better. So if you take them through like breathing exercises and stuff like that, you might find their performance improves because they're able to see more on the field, even though all you did was like a stress exercise. It's going to have other benefits in the long run. But alongside that, if you have somebody who's just totally in their head and they're really struggling to get rid of all the kind of negative self-talk and different thoughts, and you don't have any ways or strategies of dealing with that, if you actually just give them a more physical task and something like opening their field of view, that can really go a long way to reducing the underlying stress levels. Probably not going to get rid of them entirely, and you're probably going to find that they're going to need to be reminded constantly to work on opening the peripheral field, because that self-talk is going to just come creeping back in. But if they start getting good at habitually remembering to do that, then that can be a nice way out of it if you don't have any other psychological tips and tricks to deal with that. Okay, that was a long time on vision. Let's leave vision there, and we're going to move on to something that kind of ties in pretty closely, and that's the vestibular system. So the vestibular system essentially is like a series of spirit levels inside your ears, and they tell you which way up you are. So every time your head is rotating, every time it's moving, it's going up and down, side to side, the vestibular system has little sensors that say, hey, we're moving, this is which way we're moving. And it basically tells you in relation to your head. And then your brain has a process of connecting your head to your body, and that is your proprioceptive system, which we'll talk about next. So your brain figures out which way your head's moving. Because the proprioceptive system already knows what position your body's in, it gives it a kind of final total picture of what you look like in space. And the vestibular system is sort of interesting. So in athletes, you always assume vestibular function is going to be pretty high because you're in a game, your head is turning all the time. You're, again, moving forwards, backwards, up and down. Your vestibular system is getting more of a workout than most non-athletic individuals. But it's also a bit of a weird one in that we see as people age, vestibular function seems to go down no matter what. Like even the super athletic people, their I can't say the word now, their vestibular system starts to degrade over time anyway. Maybe it goes a little bit slower, but it still seems to happen. And when it comes to sports, there's a couple of risk factors of things that can make that happen quite a bit quicker. And one of them is kind of falling. So if you're falling and hitting the ground an awful lot, then that is going to activate the vestibular system a whole lot. But sometimes, again, if you're engaging in lots of non-controlled falling, so falls where you weren't expecting it to happen, if that's then accompanied with like pain and injury and stuff like that, sometimes that can kind of overstimulate the vestibular system. It becomes hyper aroused. It starts to become afraid of falling, and that can cause problems. If the fall itself results in any kind of whiplash, then that can cause more degradation of the vestibular system. And then the other thing is any kind of trauma to the head, which again, in a sport where your head is used pretty often, we might find that although we're giving it quite a bit of a workout, there are plenty of instances where our vestibular system is going to drop down, at least for a short period of time. And what happens when the vestibular system function declines or becomes hyperactive, or it's just not functioning the way that our brain would like it to when we're doing difficult tasks? The brain kind of says, okay, no worries. We have 3 vestibular canals on one side, 3 vestibular canals on the other side. If one gets weak, so let's say one of the vestibular canals on my left side gets a bit weaker, it's not responding as quickly, the brain says, okay, cool, let's just stop listening to that one, and we'll use information from the right side to help decide what's going on the left side. And over time, maybe the right side starts to decline as well. Well, because the vestibular system's dealing with balance, and we have eyes open all the time, and eyes are actually really good at helping us deal with balance, then over time, the vestibular system might say, okay, let's ignore both of those sides. And let's just say every time we see the world go vroom, like that, that's going to be a signal that we're moving to the left. That's going to be a signal that we're moving to the right. So although we are working out our vestibular systems pretty hard, it's pretty common, especially in footballers, to find a vestibular system that is maybe not functioning as well as you might expect for the degree of athleticism that person has. How would you know that is the case? What I would recommend you do, close your eyes. Test your balance, like stand on one foot, test out your balance, close your eyes, and see how much of a difference is there between eyes open and eyes closed balance. For somebody who's pretty physically fit, there should be a very, very small difference between balance with your eyes open and balance with your eyes closed. So the more kind of strength you have in your body, it should be pretty easy to close your eyes and not need to rely on that visual information. Your balance will get a little bit worse, but if your ankle is steady, it's not kind of shaking around with your eyes open, then you close your eyes, your ankle should be steady. You shouldn't have too many sways and twists. You might find like, ooh, and then re-steady yourself. But you should get better over practice. It shouldn't be too difficult in the long term. If you close your eyes and your balance is going haywire, then that's a pretty strong sign that we could do with some work on the vestibular system. And then the other way that we can do it, if you wanted to kind of bulletproof this a little bit, with your eyes open and with your eyes closed, practice moving your head around. So when we start challenging the vestibular system, then see, can you actually keep your balance? So head moving with your eyes open, it's going to get way worse. Your balance is going to get way harder, no matter how athletic you are. And then head moving with your eyes closed. Again, the difference should be relatively similar. There'll be a bit worse when you close your eyes, but if it's wildly different, again, this is a sign we want to train the vestibular system. And so how do we train the vestibular system on its own? Literally just that. So eyes closed, move your head around and keep your balance. You don't need to be specific, write your name, draw circles, be really linear about it, go left and right, up and down, do all the diagonals, tilt it left and right. All that good stuff is going to work the vestibular system a little bit harder. Then the other thing that we're going to need to do when it comes to football, like I said, to have good visual capacity and control, we want to be able to move our eyes to anywhere we want and not have it affect what's going on with our head and neck and trunk. Well, the same thing's true then for the vestibular system. We should be able to move our head any which way that we want without that affecting the rest of our body as well. And that includes our eyes. So you should be able to look to the right and move your head to the right at the same time. You should be able to look to the right and keep your eyes dead center. You should also be able to look to the left while this is going to be my downfall. Look to the left. Sorry, I'm mirroring the screen, so that was confusing. But yeah, you should be able to look the opposite direction while your head goes the other direction. And that's true for every possible configuration of eye movement, head movement, and body movement that you could possibly have. So if you're rotating your body to the right, maybe your head's going to the right, maybe your head's going to the left, maybe your eyes are going up, maybe they're going down. All of those different positions are super important to your brain because you need to be able to do all of them depending on which comes up. If you need to look down at your feet, you have to be able to look down at your feet without tripping over yourself because your spine wanted to get involved as well. If you need to be looking over this way, you have to be able to keep a good trajectory. And if your body wants to follow, or if stimulating your vestibular canals causes it to get hyper aroused and suddenly your body's not sure what's going on in terms of balance, that's going to be a big issue as well. So vision and vestibular, they're pretty similar. It's all about just training these things to be able to move all the different directions they want, because the quicker they can move, the more time you have after to figure out what's going on. And I'll just pause this briefly as a little plug. If you are interested in, how can I look at these specific visual and vestibular movements? I actually have a product which is linked in the description. This is called the Neuroband. It's a wearable vision and balance training tool, so a vision and vestibular training tool that I've had some pretty good results coming back from footballers especially, but it's just essentially 2 little workouts that you can do, one to kind of warm you up and get these systems kind of fired up and moving, another one to work it out, let's say, and actually challenge it in more complex positions and ways. And it's also pretty cheap. So if you are looking to get into this, you can find the resources for free if you dig around. That's also a nice way to just have it organized for you. So vision and vestibular, we've got out of the way. Let's move now to proprioception. So proprioception is basically your brain's ability to draw a picture of what your body looks like. Okay, so if your shoulders are up versus whether they're down, if your head is up versus down, if your hand is here versus down here, your body kind of needs to know all those things. So you've got loads of different muscles that can do loads of different positions, but the capacity of the muscle is only useful if you know the position of the joint in space. So if my hand is extended all the way back here, if I tell my forearm muscles to contract even harder, that's going to pull it back further. That's potentially going to cause big problems. However, if my hand was in this position, that would actually be a really good idea for moving my hand. So if I know that I need to reach my arm up over my head or to go and strike a ball, the signals that I send to the muscles depend on the current position that they're actually in. And the more accurate a view and picture I have of that, the easier that's going to be. Now, proprioceptive training, this is where you already do proprioceptive training. Anything where you're training your body, anything where you're doing like joint mobility exercises during a warm-up or something like that is pretty standard classic proprioception training. The more you move a joint, the more all of the different receptors, like for stretch and touch and pressure, are going to be activated. The more they send signals up to the brain, the more information the brain gets about where those things are. If you're really sedentary and you don't move your right arm for a decade, then eventually your brain's going to get really bad at figuring out where your right arm is in space, because we contracted the biceps and the traps and the deltoids by X amount, and the brain goes, yeah, but I forgot what that means. Like, does that mean my arm's here now, or does that mean it's up here? I haven't held on to the memory of what's going on there. So when it comes to proprioception training, the more mobility work you do, the better. But the one caveat that I would add is that it's usually a good idea to do mobility work with your eyes closed if you want the maximum benefit to the proprioceptive system. Okay, so this is something that when I was talking about vision training, I said that the visual system is super important. It's about 50% of all the brain cells that you have actually are related in some way to vision. And that's a great benefit to us because it's our like dominant sense, and it's how we experience the world essentially is mostly visual. But that can be a real problem when it comes to stuff like energy levels and fatigue. When one system in the brain starts to fail, the visual system will do its best to try and take over. So we use the vestibular example already, that if we're not getting good information from the vestibular system, then the brain will take information of like, which way did I just see the world move, or do I see a flat line in the horizon? That's going to give me an indication that I'm the right way up, and that's how I want it to be. So now I've got the visual system doing the job of the visual system, but also the job of the vestibular system. Well, the same thing goes for proprioception. So how do I know my arm is here and not here? Well, partly it's because of how I feel the sensation in the joints, but the other part of it is that I know my arm's here because I can see it. I'm looking at you, but my peripheral vision sees that arm in the air. And quite a lot of proprioception is reinforced by what my visual system sees. And again, that's a really useful thing. Every time you get injured, so if I get a shoulder injury or if I get a knee injury, then that's going to limit my proprioceptive capacity for a little while. And just like the vestibular system, if that kind of carries on, or if that's accompanied by loads of stress, then you might find that actually the proprioception of the knee or the proprioception of the shoulder suddenly isn't what it used to be, and it's kind of degrading over time. But your visual system can make up for it. So say, well, if I see my arm, then I know where my arm is. If I don't see my arm, then I know it's probably back here. That helps me make an estimate, and combined with the information from the joints that are working correctly, I can surmise that this is where my shoulder is in space. On something like the knee, it's even weirder. If the horizon was up here and now suddenly it's down here, then that's a good sign that I've stood up. Or if it's gone the other way, then that's a good chance that I'm now lower down than I used to be. And that tells me, okay, well, even though I can't actually see my knees, the fact that the level of the world has changed is a good chance that either I'm bending my hips or my knees or my ankles. And if the ankles and hips are telling me this much information, then I can fill in the gaps. So again, it's a really useful system. It's in terms of survival, it's great. But the problem is, over time, if we aren't rehabbing injuries sufficiently, if we're not improving all of these other systems really well, then you find that the visual system is just starting to take over the job of anything and everything that it has to. And eventually the energy that takes is going to take a toll. So what you will tend to find is that people whose visual systems are compensating for stuff like the vestibular system and the proprioceptive system will fatigue much easier. And also they'll find like their level of whatever brain fog or just cognitive awareness starts to go down greatly, because the visual system is trying to use up so much information, and it now doesn't have the capacity to do all of the visual processing it needs to do for its sport or for its day-to-day interactions, which I don't know, I find that pretty fascinating and pretty cool. But all that is just a caveat to say, if you are doing all of these kind of mobility exercises in the warm-up, doing them with eyes closed is a really great way to just massively increase your proprioceptive capacity to help your body figure out what is my shoulder doing specifically. The only other thing that I could recommend is isolating things a little bit more. So, rather than focusing on arm circles where everything opens up, actually, we're going to try and keep everything neutral. And this arm circle is just going to be focused on the shoulder joint, or maybe it's going to be focused on the scapula, or maybe we're going to focus on just the elbow. So you can see I'm doing again, fairly standard elbow circles. But if you look at my hand is just dead weight on the end, rather than using my hand to kind of help draw the circle. So isolating the joint a little bit more will be more useful for that joint. Only other thing then, I guess, finally, is sensation work as well. If you've got an area that you're injuring quite often, one of the reasons massage guns are so good, not necessarily because of rolling out tissues and stuff like that, but just the fact that it's feeding any information at all up to the brain about what's going on at that joint is the useful bit. So you might find that, a massage gun might be the right thing, playing with temperature, playing with like tapping or like very light touch, deep pressure, experimenting with any kind of sensory work at all might actually be pretty good. Finally, then we've got cognition. Cognition, again, usually when people are asking me about brain training, I think they expect that we're going to be talking about cognition, and I'm probably going to be talking about cognition maybe the least. Basically, the big thing with cognition is decision making, ignoring distractions, and managing emotions. So when you are in a game, you're going to be doing those three things all the time. Decision making, I think footballers at all levels practice decision making and ignoring distractions. It's something that like coaches throw into pretty much every warm up. In decision making, it's partly memory. So the most classic warm up I see is go for a run. When I shout 1, everyone's going to jump up, and shout 2, you're going to touch the floor. 3, you're going to, I don't know, do a star jump or a press up or something. That is essentially practicing decision making. When you get the information, can you remember what it's supposed to correspond to, and then make a decision to react to that? The other thing that comes with decision making that kind of ties into ignoring distractions is having a strategy or a goal and knowing when to execute it and when not to execute it. So when I was working with the guys at Chelsea, they had loads of really fun games, which was like 2 people would run for a ball, or when we were doing some acrobatics training, they'd be running for like a mini trampoline with the goal of they're going to run and jump on the trampoline, and both of them are running at the same time. So you're running for this football or trampoline or whatever the target is. But right before they get there, one name is going to be called out, and that is going to be the person who's going to actually go for it, and the other person is going to move away. And basically, the later and later that they waited to call the name out, now you've got the decision that like I'm going, but subconsciously, eventually, your brain starts going, right, well, what's going to happen if we're going full tilt here? What happens when we get to the ball and you're not the guy? We need to start making a backup strategy. And what that means is before they've even been told that they need to ease off, they've started actually subconsciously easing off. And that's counterproductive for what they're supposed to be doing. And so games like that where they would be both aiming for a ball, and then you hear the name means that person goes for it, and then they would add extra things. So the name followed by the other person's name would mean that the second person actually had to overtake, so like run over the ball before the second person would get it. Calling somebody's last name meant that they were not going to go for it, and yeah, just more and more complicated rules that mean that you have to kind of process this information and act on the information in real time. When it comes to assessing kind of cognitive capacities, there's a little bit that I can do in a one-on-one basis, but most of the time, what I'm going to find is I need to see that person in an actual game. And usually, if you want to see your cognitive function improve, actually you need to start improving all of these systems underneath. So if you're improving your visual system, if you're improving your balance system, if you're improving your proprioceptive system, if you improve your breathing, if you improve your memory, if you improve all of those things, you'll find cognitive function just starts to work better. And then the final kind of link in the chain is are you actually assessing how you're moving and how you're thinking in the actual game itself? Because I can take you through loads of cognitive drills and see, can you react really, really fast to information that I give you? But what we know from a lot of studies is that you will just get better at doing that in the context that I've put you in. So if I'm asking you to remember a string of numbers, you'll be really good at remembering a string of numbers, but you're maybe not going to be so good at remembering all of the different tactics that you're potentially able to play in your game. So generally, the way I tell people to deal with cognition, if you're trying to improve it on your own, think about not improving cognition itself, but improve how the rest of your brain is functioning. Best place to start is vision and vestibular. Then we got proprioceptive, and other things can play a pretty huge part. But again, I would say the returns are going to be slightly diminishing. The only kind of big one that I would say is being able to manage emotions. So like looking at something like meditation can be really, really good. Or, getting something like talking therapy or something like that. I don't do that kind of work with people, but I do a lot of work with things like motivational interviewing, which can help to have the same effect of like helping people figure out what it is they are aiming for, what they're trying to focus on when it comes to the pitch, and that can be pretty useful. So yeah, those are the big four. The only other thing I would say, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, sometimes it can be useful to just book in for a call with somebody like myself, because while those are the things that I would look for in the sports specific context, the reality of how your brain works and how your body works is just like we talked about with cognition. The thing that's going to make you better at the sport, the problems aren't necessarily cropping up in the sport itself. The problems are usually cropping up in the things you're spending the most time doing. So even the professional athletes, so I've worked with Olympians who I think archery was like the sport that I worked with, where the person I was working with, at least, I don't know if it's resembles how the sport itself looks, but this person was training an insane number of hours in the day. It sounded like up to about 8 to 10 hours. They were just constantly going. And I've seen higher numbers than that in things like chess, or my own sport is kind of Rubik's Cubes and speed cubing. But that's sports where, you're using your brain a lot, but you're not placing huge physical demands on yourself. Where was I going with that? But the reality is, even if you're spending 8 hours a day training, there's still more of the day, or at least an equal amount of the day, that you are not training and you're engaged in your like day-to-day activity. And the little things that crop up there often are the things that are placing excess tension through the system. They're placing excess stress in the system, and they have a much more compounding negative effect if we're not sorting them out. So what do I mean by that? Things like, we looked at vision. If we sort out your visual system, the benefit isn't just that you're better at seeing things in football. The benefit is actually that the whole way through your life, day to day, you're seeing things quicker, you're able to react to stuff quicker. So actually the stress levels in your system are going to go down, not just from the training you're doing on the football field, but because of the training you're doing in your day-to-day life. So while I haven't mentioned other things that we might look at when it comes to training the brain, things like breathing, for example, could be tremendously important, because you don't stop breathing when you leave the football field, or when you go on the football field. You're breathing 24 hours a day. So if we can improve it throughout the whole 24 hours, then we leave you in a much better position overall than if we just look at maybe the kind of stress breathing. If we look at like how to stop you hyperventilating in crucial circumstances, that's going to be good for your football performance. If we look at improving how you're breathing, how efficient your breathing is overall, that's going to be even better. So a lot of the time, the goal might not actually be to look at football first. The goal might actually be to look at, like, how do I basically function as a human? And if I can get those things sorted out, then you might find that you just suddenly get better at football from the get-go. Okay. Hope this hasn't been too ranty. That was all the information I've got about, like, my work that I do one-on-one. Do let me know if there's any questions. I'm going to jump now to, as quickly as I can, talk through the group coaching side of things. So, like, what would you do if you're working with a football team, you're coaching kids? My background in this, as I said, I spent quite a chunk of my life working for the National Centre for Circus Arts in London. And my job there was kind of like, I was just tasked with, let's look at kids' development, athletic development, and how the brain is wired and adapted for certain things. And can we start changing the way that we provide programming for kids based on that? Adults as well, but kids is what we're talking about here. And coincidentally, in that time, the organization was also in talks with Chelsea Football Club to provide some training to their academy coaches. This was the football coaches initially, to learn acrobatics. And that might sound a little weird, but kind of over the journey, we sort of pieced together all of what was going on. And I've left in the link, in the description, a link to a talk by a guy called Will Tullett. So he was, I believe, the movement coach or one of the head movement coaches for the Chelsea Academy. I think he then went on to work for the first team. Will had this whole idea about adaptability in sport and how, if you coach football tactics and if you get overly technical when kids are really young, it's not necessarily going to serve them well. One of the guarantees that you've got is, as those kids get older, the tactics and the techniques are all going to have changed. And so you don't necessarily want to have that strongly ingrained into the kid's brain. What you do want them to be really good at is adaptability. So they were devising all these kinds of really cool training programs based around becoming more adaptable to whatever, like when circumstances change, how quickly can this player adapt? So that might be over the long term that, there's different tactics or techniques, or just working with different coaches and managers. It could also be in the short term that suddenly the game is progressing in a much different way to how you were initially thinking. And is that going to mess with you, or are you going to be able to just go, okay, throw out the old game plan, let's make a new one, and we'll ad hoc on the fly. We're just going to go with whatever's thrown at us. And that was essentially why we had been hired. We were providing training in a lot of the different types of movement work. And I would encourage you to watch Will's video, because there's some really fun examples of the types of, like, lesson structure and stuff, where they would do like really intense bursts of football drills, and then they'd go into something completely unrelated, and then back to football, and just watching the athletes really struggle initially with things changing so much and so quickly, and then being able to kind of figure out what's going on and get back to it. That also led to me going and kind of doing a little presentation of my stuff as well, and kind of talking through our different approaches. So this is all going to be based on that. My experience with coaching group football is not extensive, and it's not over a long period of time. It was over a period of like 1 or 2 years. And so yeah, I'm going to offer my opinions based on what I kind of saw going on, based on what makes sense to me, based on my own kind of research on kids' development. So, one of the things to say when it comes to all the previous stuff that I've talked about that I've worked with one-on-one, when I'm working with adult footballers one-on-one, usually we're assuming that there's like a weak link in the chain somewhere that over time has kind of started to degrade, and that all the other systems around it have kind of built on top lots of little compensations so that we can move better. In kids, we usually don't find that quite as much. So, still very possible that it happens. But I guess when it comes to a group coaching type of thing, it's almost worth assuming that that's not what we're going to be looking at. What we want to look at is, can we just challenge all of these systems as much as we possibly can? Because again, if we've got kids whose brains are developing, their brains are going to be crying out for what stimulus and what information is important. And so one of the best ways that we can do that is keep everything actually nice and vague, but just say, okay, well, if we know the visual system's important, then we need to have drills, we need to have tactics, we need to have games that encourage using the eyes in as many different ways as I described. Same with the vestibular system. Are we actually training balance? Can we work on balance as a trainable skill? Can we work on balance, especially with eyes closed? Can we work on like joint mobility drills and stuff like that? Can we come up with, games that challenge these kinds of things in those players without having to be too specific about individual problems or without having to get too caught up in like the specific science of it? So I guess my recommendations when it comes to incorporating this kind of stuff into kids' classes is the absolute best way that you can do this is through games. So football being a more complex sport and requiring the athletes to be able to kind of focus on things, ignore things, stuff that has weird and large amounts of rules are generally going to be quite good for that. So just playing any kind of a standard football game, but throwing in rules that restrict what the head and the eyes can do, or rules that encourage the head and the eyes to start reacting in different ways, are essentially how you're going to train a kid to be able to use their eyes and head for whatever the tactics of the day end up turning out to be. So we don't want to make it overly specific. People say like, all right, well, we got to teach to be able to scan the field and see what's going on. Yes, that's true, but the more specific you get, actually, the less useful the skill becomes for a child, whereas the opposite's usually true for an adult. Actually, for an adult, you want to make things more and more specific so that it's more useful to them in the now. The kid actually needs everything to be built under as wide a base and foundation as possible to be able to go. So, like, ideas for different types of games and things like that. Using colors can always be really great. So having things where, you put a wristband on, so everybody hands behind their back, give them all a wristband, 2 different colors, and then just say, okay, go. And straight away they start into like a 5-minute football game, but now they have to actually be looking at all the individual players to find out who's on their team and who's not on their team. Can be like a nice way. You could also do it with if you've got like bibs or jerseys with numbers only on the back or numbers only on the front, so people can try and like deceive you and stuff like that. Putting obstacles or screens over certain parts of the pitch. So vision is restricted to certain areas. And that means as soon as they get the ball through like a narrow corridor or something like that, suddenly a new field has opened up and you get to see what other players are behind it. So you have to react much more quickly because you don't have the ability to see the whole pitch like you would before. Having coaches that are going to hold up, different numbers or different hand signals, and then ask players to count and hold in their memory how many times did this come up throughout a whole game, or even just changing what scores points. So being able to, instead of goal scoring points, like how many times you pass and things like that, you don't have to be too specific about what it's doing for the visual field. The more different variations that you come up with for changing the rules, the more you'll find that these things just start to work themselves out. When it comes to vestibular imbalance, you can have things like obviously just training balance with eyes closed could be really, really useful. Having two people have to be, or having like a target that everybody has to always be looking at the target while they're playing. So all eyes are fixed one way, and they're having to use peripheral vision and things like that to figure out where the ball is. Similarly for proprioception, having somebody on a empty, clear field, and they've got buddies who have to try and call out information to help them figure out where the ball is, how to get the ball to the goal. Again, it doesn't isolate the joints, but it gets them literally playing part of a game with their eyes closed. Can be really good ways for challenging the proprioceptive system. I'll have to think through if I've got any more examples like that, but I also don't want to go too much over the hour for this video because it's kind of been long enough already. So what I'll do is I'm going to leave it there. If people want to discuss more on the kind of group coaching side and might be up for choosing a time where we can all meet together and chat through like ideas for skill games that can challenge different systems and stuff like that, then we can do that. Otherwise, I hope some of this information might have been useful to you. Let me know if you got any questions or comments. And yeah, that's about it from me. So I'll see you later.